Okay, everyone, good evening. This is the May 20th, 2014 meeting of the Governance Committee, which is a subcommittee of the Board of Selectmen here in the town of Carver. What I'd like to do this evening is begin with some administrative matters before we get into the meat and potatoes of why we're here tonight, and this is indeed a very important meeting. So first we have minutes to approve, and
I would make a motion to approve them.
these are the meeting minutes of May 9th and May 13th of
Right.
2014. Mr. Grimes, have you had an opportunity to look at those?
Yes, I did.
Yep.
I'd second that motion.
I had one amendment that I was looking to make.
Okay.
In the meeting minutes of May 13th, about halfway down, there's some language about us discussing appointment versus election of the Board of Health. And you'll see where my name is referenced about halfway down on that series of quotes. Do you see that, gentlemen? It says, Gray feels many talented people don't run because they don't want to subject themselves to
Yes.
the political process. Going forward, the town should consider an appointed process. That next sentence, though, I don't recall saying, and it does not accurately reflect my position, so I would move to strike that sentence. The one beginning with however.
Not going forward, but however.
Yeah, from however to the end of that sentence, which
Okay.
ends with continue. You see that, Mr. Grimes?
Right.
I would move to strike that.
Strike.
Does anyone else have any changes that they'd like to make with regard to either the May 9th or the May 13th meeting minutes? Everybody good?
Yep.
Okay. So I asked for a motion. I think, Mr. Angley, you made that motion?
Seconded. I agree.
All in favor?
Aye.
So those meeting minutes for those two dates are accepted herewith. The next thing that I want to speak of tonight is our ongoing efforts as a subcommittee to do public outreach in connection with the proposals that we have made to the Board of Selectmen most recently. And part of our charter, if you will, as a subcommittee, is to take steps to generate an electronic newsletter. So, Mr. Town Administrator, who is our designated electronic town newsletter author, I would ask if you could find some time in the next week to put something together and have that posted on the website for members of the public to read at their convenience. Is that a time frame that works for you?
It does.
Any further discussion on this point, gentlemen?
Nope.
So then I ask for a motion to have Mr. Malinowski generate an electronic newsletter suitable for publication on the town website sometime within the next 7 days.
So moved.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Next, my understanding is that once we get through this meeting tonight and answer whatever questions you folks might have, that the Board of Selection, or the Board of Selectmen will be coming back in approximately 1 week to discuss our proposals and probably take votes. That's my expectation anyway, after having been here a week ago. Is that still the plan, Mr. Malinowski?
Yes, it is.
So the voting on our proposals, which I will tick through for everybody again tonight, I expect will happen next week, and that will be an agenda item on the BOS agenda. Very good. So you folks know what the plan is, and of course, we're being televised tonight by our friends from CCAT. So those of you watching at home as well can be prepared for what's coming next Tuesday. Last of our administrative matters is the scheduling of our next meeting. I want to take care of this now before we get into the introductory remarks, the recitation of our proposals, and taking Q&A from members of the public. I think that we should probably skip next week, because that's the week that the BOS will be discussing our proposals, and maybe think about meeting again the following week. So, Mr. Angley, Mr. Grimes, if you could check your respective schedules. Does Monday or Tuesday work better for you folks?
That would be 2 weeks from tonight, possibly 2 weeks from tonight.
Well, we can talk about the time of day.
Okay. I'm
Usually
sorry.
we've been working in the mornings.
In the morning, I'm sorry. Yes, morning. Morning's better for me. Either one is fine.
Mr. Chairman, the other members showing up tonight, or? are
I
they
had
excused?
expected them, and perhaps because we're starting at
probably running
6:30
behind. I
and
just
not at
didn't know if
7,
they
they'll
were
be
gonna be
coming in a
absent.
little bit later.
I just have a question. In terms of the possible agenda of our next meeting, 2 weeks hence, whenever, that means that whatever we resolve tonight, our goal was to have unanimity in our, and I think we achieved that. You know, everybody voted aye for our proposed governance issues. Is there would it be wise to have the time before town meeting to reconsider anything that the Board of Selectmen, questions they may have, information that may be forthcoming tonight, revisiting something that maybe we'd overlooked, or, I'm not sure, I just
I
wonder
think
how
we
that's
have
gonna
to
work.
let matters play out,
Okay,
and we'll see how that goes.
okay.
I have some specific agenda items that I will be bringing to Mr. Malinowski's attention. He will post those agenda items. And we have other matters that still are on the docket that we have not yet reached.
Right.
So tonight really is for another purpose. It's not really to talk about anything new. It's really to try to answer whatever questions people might want to ask of us tonight. And if, as a result of those questions, we feel that we need possibly to revisit something, then we can always do so.
I haven't had a chance to read some of the submissions, and I'm sure they're substantive, so.
So does Monday or Tuesday of 2 weeks hence work better for you two?
Either one is, so,
Tuesday, I think would be better, but I can do either.
whatever. If
Okay.
Tuesdays works for me as well as.
So, Mr. Malinowski, once we get the other two folks either in here tonight or communicated with via email or phone, we'll try to lock down a meeting 2 weeks hence, either Monday or Tuesday morning.
Actually, excuse me, I just checked my magic thing here. Tuesday is certainly better for me,
Yeah, Tuesday
I-
would be better
I-
for me, too.
Okay,
if that works.
very good. So we are now through with our boring administrative business, necessary as it was. And tonight, we will be talking as a committee about our proposals to what I think is going to amount to a change in the way business has customarily been conducted in the town of Carver for many, many years. For those of you here tonight, and also those of you who may be watching at home, allow me to introduce the members of this committee. First, to my left is Chairman Emeritus of the Board of Selectmen, Jack Angley, and to my right, Chairman Emeritus of the Board of Selectmen, James Grimes. Please don't interpret the fact that one is sitting to my left and one is sitting to my right indicative of their politics. But those are our two venerated board chairs, now retired. We also have, as a member of this committee, the current chairman of the Board of Selectmen, Dick Ward, and as well the finance chairman, the current finance chairman, John Cotter. These folks, as I implied, come from very different sides of the political aisle, or at least have historically been on different sides of the political aisle. And I think that that's a good thing. We've heard all different kinds of opinions about the way government in the town of Carver should be shaped going forward and improved. The portfolio handed to us is a large one, and the responsibility that we have been asked to undertake for the town by the Board of Selectmen is heavy. And I don't think that there was a single meeting amongst our 10 where somebody didn't say, this is hard stuff, this is difficult, this is weighing on us. And it continues to weigh on all of us. We made our decisions not lightly, but rather after significant discussion, which often was discussion that did not immediately yield consensus among the committee members. So having said that, I think tonight, especially tonight, we should all stand and say pledge allegiance to the flag. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you, everybody. At the outset, allow me to state that we have met as a committee 10 times to date for nearly 20 hours and have conducted significant fact-finding and deliberations, which included meetings with most of the department heads who work for the town of Carver. I said last week to the Board of Selectmen, and I continue to maintain, and I know my brothers up here with me agree, that the people who work in the town of Carver are well-meaning, well-intentioned, talented folks who sacrifice every day to make sure that important town services are delivered to the residents here in Carver. We have been uniformly impressed with their ability to answer our questions and to cooperate in terms of considering new ways and new approaches of doing things. Now, it is important to remember that there has not been much change in the town of Carver in the organization and the structure of government in the town of Carver for a long time. And it is also true that we are facing very significant budget constraints at this point. So the time now is ripe to consider these changes and to move forward in a constructive and productive way. We know the history recently in this town. There have been many instances where the Board of Selectmen have been divided in their voting. We have had situations where official investigations have been conducted, and political infighting and discourse has not been pleasant often. So the Governance Committee, when it was formed, one of its first objectives, I think, amongst all of us, and I don't want to speak for my brothers here, and Mr. Ward, as you can see, has now joined us, but one of our first goals was to foster discussion, productive discussion, and civil discussion that would hopefully yield some positive recommendations that the Board of Selectmen could consider. We, as you know, if you were watching last week, came to decisions on 7 significant recommendations. And I'm proud to say that having chaired those committee meetings, we were able to achieve, as a committee, unanimity. It wasn't easy, and I can tell you that on the very first issue that we considered as a committee, the initial board vote broke 2-2. So we had work to do amongst ourselves. We had issues that we needed to talk out and issues on which we needed to compromise. So here we are tonight, after having conducted our meetings, arrived at our recommendations, and after having spoken to the Board of Selectmen last week. So this evening is a public outreach meeting. We as a committee felt strongly that in advance of town meeting, which is in 1 month, that everyone who wanted to be given an opportunity to ask us questions or to suggest proposals of their own, because our work is not yet done. This is the initial piece, the piece that we could achieve given the time frame allowed before town meeting. So we're all ears tonight. I shall recognize at least once anyone who wishes to speak. However, I shall begin with the current selectmen who are present that might want to say something or ask us questions out of respect for the offices that they hold. And then I will go to any department heads that might be present, and for the same reason, recognize them for any questions that they might have of us or any suggestions. Then we will turn to questions that might be asked by members of the public. I ask that the members of the public be brief and succinct. Please remember to state your name and address when I call you to come up to the table. As I said, we arrived at unanimous decisions concerning 7 proposals. The first of these had to do with the police chief selection process. We also arrived at a decision with regard to the treasurer tax collector, making the recommendation in that instance that that office move from elected to appointed. We have recommended the abolishing of the DPW commissioners. We have also recommended that the Board of Health go from elected to appointed. We are recommending that the conservation agent's position go to part-time with a separate line item in the budget for grant writing. And we have also recommended the consolidation, for now, of the DPW and Town Facilities Department with the goal to fold into that, or under that umbrella, the school buildings and grounds by July 1 of next year, 2015. And finally, we are recommending a consolidation of inspectional departments, specifically the Department of Planning, Conservation, Board of Health, and the Building Department. We feel that these recommendations on a variety of levels are important and called for at this point. And just wanted to throw those out for those of you at home again who are watching, and also by way of reminder for those people who are present tonight. As you can see, Mr. Cotter, the chairman of the Finance Committee, has now arrived. We're happy to see him, and we're all together now as a committee. So let us begin. I recognize first Mr. Dunham, who, okay, well, aren't you nice? Ms. Hewins. Would you please come up and talk to us about any concerns that you might have or questions you might like to pose?
Thank you, Mr. Chair, members of the board. I have a document that I've tried to shorten up from the first time I sent it to Mr. Gray. If I may be permitted to read it into the record, this concerns the position of conservation agent.
I'm going to ask you to approach this a bit differently. I would rather that instead of reading a document word for word into the record, and it will become part of the record as in its written form, I'd like to hear from you as to what your concerns are generally. Just summarize this letter and highlight the points that you're concerned about or you'd like to ask us questions about.
Okay, well, I think that, first of all, it's very important for people to understand that Carver is very unique. We are the third largest town in Plymouth County, if not in southeastern Massachusetts, 40 square miles. We have a special soil type called Carver sand that perks easily and also allows pollution into our aquifer. We have over 50% wetlands in the town, and half of those are cranberry bogs, which are also considered bordering vegetated wetlands. The point, I think, is there are a number of points, but I believe to start with, you need to have that picture of what the town is really all about. Public surveys for the past 40 years have told us that the public want and like and move here because of the rural character of this town. And that's something that I have personal experience of trying to ensure that we maintain that rural character, because when I was first hired as conservation agent many years ago, the position was at that time also 19 hours. And I can personally testify that it's impossible to do what needs to be done in 19 hours. You just can't do it. The position is a full-time position. It requires much more than simply permitting, although that's actually not particularly easy. I go on at great length in here about developing a partnership with the public, residents, businesses, developers, and particularly the agricultural community. All of that takes a great deal of time and patience and energy and dedication. And one of the points that I make in this document is that you're probably not going to get someone who is going to be committed to this job unless that person feels that the town is committed to the position. It's a very important position in the town. Our drinking water, as you all know, is one of our highest and best resources. Not only do we all drink the water, but our largest tax base and largest industry depends on clean water. And so it's more than just about permitting. It's about ensuring that stormwater doesn't get into the water. It's ensuring that hazardous materials don't get into the water. And it's ensuring that people understand how all of these things are connected. It may not be evident on the surface that wetlands and groundwater and agriculture have anything to do with one another, but they're all part of the same picture. And that's something that it's just physically impossible to do in 19 hours. Public education, talking people simply through a permitting process is not easy. The forms are draconian. They're state forms, so of course they are. But just there's a lot of, and I don't mean to be condescending, but there is a lot of hand-holding involved in the position. And in order to get people to understand why they need to do things right and why they need to treat our resources carefully, that's a tricky and long and complicated process. And I think I know I've said to this committee before that I take great pride in the fact that when I left, I had a bulging drawer full of farm conservation plan pages from farm conservation plans that were done for growers by the USDA that growers had to bring to the commission to demonstrate whether or not the project they wanted to do was exempt. So that kind of thing is extremely important. You don't want people going off being renegades, homeowners, growers, businesses, developers. And it's a fine line. There's not much to keep people from doing that. I've had people joke with me that, well, now that you're gone, Sarah, we can do whatever we want. Well, they can't, but they might. And that's a problem. And we don't want that to happen, I don't think. I don't think any of us do. Some of the parts of the job that I left that I felt were very important may seem peripheral to some people, the map making, for example. But that in and of itself is something that we are provided with all these mapping tools and data layers by the state. Any commission in the state can get those. This is not something new. It's not something, you know, that I or anyone else does for free. These are tools to let people know what resources they have on their properties, to help us, both the applicant and the town, understand what's going on the property, what needs to be done. Are they exempt? Do they need a farm plan? Do they need a permit? It's hard to see those things without these kinds of tools. So those are not gratuities that I think this position has to offer. I think those are necessities. And I make it very clear, I hope, in this document that applicants aren't getting a free service here. They're getting something that they need and is required. And they're still going to have to go to engineers and all of that to get plans formed and site plans and farm plans. And that's not something we do here. But to get them to take that step coming into the office and then going out to the next step is a huge bridge. And people aren't going to have the time to build those bridges if they're only here for 19 hours. They're not going to have time to do open space planning. They're not going to have time. I understand you have money set aside for grant writing. But again, I think that the importance of having those in one position gives a person an ownership and a pride in that position and in the town. And that's particularly important if you hire someone who's not from the town of Carver, who doesn't have a particular personal concern about the town. You want them to care about that job. I believe you do. So I guess in closing, I'd like to say I hope you read this document. I've tried, I know it's long, but actually the one that I want you to really read is the one that's only 3.5 pages. You may have a longer one there. That got revised this afternoon. And I think this last one that I passed out to you tonight is more clear. The other thing I want you to understand, and some of you may not know, is that part of the reason I left, I took early retirement from my position as conservation agent, is because I thought I saw the writing on the wall, and I thought that this position, and I still think the position, is so important that it can't be about one person and about me. I understand all the politics of the past, believe me, I've been there. I know that for 5 years in a row after the position became full-time, certain people at town meeting tried to make it part-time. 5 years in a row, town meeting voted that down. I believe there was a reason for that. And I hope that in stepping away from it now, I'm able to defend it in a way that I wasn't able before. I think one other thing which is obvious, so I'm not trying to offend anyone, but our natural resources, that environment out there didn't go anywhere when I left the job. It's still there. I hope it still matters to everyone. And I realize also that your job is very difficult. And my last paragraph, I hope, is not offensive, because I don't believe you have made any knee-jerk recommendations. I'm simply hoping that you won't, because I've conveniently left. I don't believe it's time to make this job part-time. I think it's time to redouble our efforts to find a really good qualified full-time agent. Thank you.
Thank you.
Before you leave,
Excuse me?
before you leave,
Yes, sir.
it has been my intention this evening to pass each individual question or comment that a board member might have after listening to someone who comes to speak to us. I'd like to have each person heard from tonight. I'm going to take this one, though.
Okay.
And then maybe, John, you can take the next ones, whatever comment or question you feel you need to make or answer. One thing that I learned when I was a student at Amherst College and then on and after in law school is that there are many different ways to look at an issue. What this committee has tried to do throughout its deliberations is to achieve, in its recommendations, a thoughtful balance of the issues that were being presented. I think I can speak for all of us that insofar as any personal issue that relates to you and your tenure at the agent's job and the politics surrounding that over the last few years, this did not enter into our deliberations. In attempting to achieve a thoughtful balance here in connection with the agent's job, we felt that the town administrator has the sufficient experience and managerial judgment to choose appropriately from candidates that might apply to this position. We must necessarily designate some of that appointment authority to him and trust in his judgment that he's going to choose the right individual for the role. I think it's also the case that if the Board of Selectmen decides to make this position part-time in its judgment, and it turns out that it is, as you suggest, too much for one person to do 19 hours, that could be revisited down the road. But for now, it's our collective judgment that we need to look at this position in a way that has historically not been looked at in the past. That is to say, thinking about dividing responsibilities so that a part-time agent could focus on the specific conservation issues that might come before the Conservation Commission, and we have a separate line item specifically designated for grant writing, which you are so good at, that would be grant writing across different departments, just not for conservation, but also for planning. So we have tried to fit into the budget monies that would be appropriated for both of those roles, which you took unto yourself previously and performed quite well with. We know the difficult financial times that we're operating under here. We know that a certain amount of teachers are likely to be let go because of budget shortfalls. We will probably have to have a debt exclusion in connection with a new school. So there's a push and a pull here. And we don't think as a committee, or we didn't think as a committee, that it was inappropriate to look at this position and say, let's split it up a little bit. Let's assign a certain number of hours for Conservation Commission-related business. Let's assign a separate line item in the budget for the grant writing. And then if, as you suggest, the role of the conservation agent is much greater than that, then we can always revisit and think about adding additional hours or additional responsibilities. You may not be happy with that decision, but that was, I believe, the collective judgment of the board of this committee at the time. Now, the Board of Selectmen will have to vote on this next week, and I would imagine that this will also be coming up before town meeting in a month.
May I respond briefly?
Yes.
I certainly understand budget constraints. I really do, and I appreciate the difficulty with which you came to your initial recommendation. I just want you to know that for 8 years I did the job part-time. I'm not boasting. I'm taught speaking from real knowledge. It can't be done. I mean, I was paid for 19 hours, then I was paid for, 21, then for 26, and I was still here for 50 hours a week because the job needed to get done. It had to be done. And so, unless you get someone who, and even, again, in this document I say, you may get a really good person. And I hope we do, because I live here too. It's still my town. But they're going to be losing it in very short order. I almost guarantee, unless they just don't do certain things, which is probably what's going to happen.
Well, one of the things we know under our recommendation that they will not be doing is the grant writing,
Right.
which, as you well know from your long experience doing it, can be an extensive investiture in hours
That's correct.
and
I guess my
exhausting.
point
So
is,
if we have a specific line item in the budget for third-party grant writing,
right,
we thought that we could split off that part of the role, which you had traditionally performed, and have someone dedicated to that particular activity.
right.
Now, if we still are not discharging the duties of the conservation agent properly, given the 19 hours assigned to that new person, if this recommendation goes through, then again, we can always revisit this. I will add one other thing before we move on, Ms. Hewens, and that is the building inspector, and I don't mean to say that the building inspector's responsibilities are as extensive as yours were as the agent, but that was a position in town that for a long period was full-time. And it has gone fairly recently to a part-time position, and by all accounts, and I can talk about this given my role as chairman of the Zoning Board of Appeals, that seems to have gone reasonably well. I have not heard too many complaints about that office having gone from full-time to part-time. It appears as if the duties of that particular inspector's office are being handled appropriately and adequately. And I think they will continue to be so as we move towards consolidation and cross-training amongst departments. So your points are well taken. Your concerns are eloquently expressed.
Thank you.
And for now, we'll see where this goes next week when the Board of Selectmen decide to vote on this.
Thank you very much.
Mr. Dunham, please come up.
Good evening. How, do you want me to go through all the items? Because I do have some brief comments on all of them, or do one at a time?
Why don't you do one at a time?
Okay, very good. Well, first of all,
Mr. Cotter, are you listening?
take notes. First off, I would like to commend the governance committee for the dedicated work you gentlemen have all put into this. I did have the pleasure to go ahead and sit in a couple of your mornings, meetings, even though you had them in the mornings, which made it a little rougher trying to go to work, but that's all right. But I witnessed firsthand the diligence that you all put in and under the leadership of Mr. Chairman Gray, and you should all be commended for the work you've done so far. I know you've still got more to do, but as a citizen of the town, not a selectman, a citizen of the town, I want to thank you for your efforts. Okay, we'll start off with number one that you have is the appointment of the police chief by the town administrator. If I understand the procedure right, because I don't have it all exact in front of me, basically the administrator would be responsible for putting basically a search committee together to narrow it down for 5, and then the committee would then narrow it down to 3. Then the administrator would make his selection, or her, whoever is sitting in that position, to make the final decision and then present that person to the board. Also, I believe in your recommendations that the way you had it set up, there would be a performance review by the town administrator with the police chief at the 2.5-year mark. And then at that determination, I guess the town administrator would decide, okay, we need to rehire this person, reappoint them for another 3 years, or to look for somewhere else. That's probably my first problem. Basic management procedures should be that an employee has a performance review once a year. To wait until the 2.5-year point and then have a meeting with the employee to go over their performance, that's not really being fair to the employee. To me, a performance review is not only a review of the employee's performance, but how the employer is doing in relationship to that employee to help that employee to excel, whatever their position may be. I firmly believe this needs to be done on a yearly basis, because to have it done at the 2.5-year mark, something could be brought up that was be a total surprise to the employee, in this case, the police chief, that the police chief might have thought he was doing a wonderful job, and then to find out the current town administrator, whoever that may be, was not happy with it. That is not fair to the employee. Also, by doing a yearly review, they can also find out, have a better idea of, okay, the chief, we'll just use the police chief because that's who we're discussing right now. He can go ahead, or she can say, okay, this is what I've accomplished this first year. This is where I want to take the department next year, the next year, and the next year. It allows the police chief to go ahead and better voice his or her plans for the department, and at the same time give the employer, currently actually, as it stands now, it would be the Board of Selectmen, but under your plan, it would be the town administrator, a chance to go ahead and say, okay, yes, but maybe you might want to think about this. And that way, they both go ahead and grow together. So I really feel that, this plan as submitted really needs to have that change where it's a yearly performance review, not just one. Now, as far as the overall arching point of the town administrator appointing the police chief as opposed to the Board of Selectmen, I have a philosophical difference. I can understand where you people went through, and I'm almost willing to bet you had the same conversations of the points that I'm concerned about. But to me, it's, I had to think, what is the town's responsibility to its citizens? First, to educate their children. That's where the school committee and the superintendent of school comes in from. Second, is to make sure that the town spends the tax money wisely and that all the other town organizations work as a good unit in giving the services to the residents that the citizens are paying for and deserve. That's where the town administrator comes in. Between the school superintendent and town administrator, those are probably the two biggest jobs in the town. So that's why the Board of Selectmen goes ahead and has the responsibility to go ahead and select a town administrator. But there's one other area that the town has as an obligation to its citizens, and that's the protection of the life and property of those citizens, and that falls under the police and fire department. These are two tremendous jobs. And again, I feel the Board of Selectmen, each person that's elected to that board, is elected to go ahead and make the big decisions in town. Not only to guide the town and, provide guidance to the town administrator, but to go ahead and make, basically the buck stops with them. And so, to me, I feel it's vitally important that the board continue and to appoint both the fire chief and the police chief. Now, I do know, there was discussion that, well, you wanted to take politics out of it. I think there have already been a couple of steps to already take the politics out of it. First off, the town voted to ensure that no town employee could be a member of the Board of Selectmen. So that takes that conflict out of the equation. Second, I think part of the problem that happened with the previous board and the previous police chief was you had a 5-year contract, yet you have a state regulation that requires a reappointment every 3 years. And that seemed, because I sat through every meeting on that with the Board of Selectmen, it seemed that that was the cause of the biggest consternation. They had a hard time, for whatever reason, setting aside the 3-year requirement versus the length of the 5-year contract. I believe if we go ahead and we keep all the police contract to a 3 year, so it coincides with that 3-year appointment, that problem is now off the board. As far as taking politics out of it, you're never going to do that under the situation unless we had a town manager as opposed to a town administrator who had the ultimate authority and responsibility to go ahead and make that appointment. But we have a town administrator. We may, someday want to go to a town manager. That's not the discussion for today. The discussion for today is having the town administrator make that appointment. And again, maybe not with Mr. Malinowski. I could see, we have another administrator 5, 10 years down the road, whatever it is. They may want to bring in their own person. Or, as we all know, the board changes every year to one degree or another most times. Who's to say that the board could be made up of 3 people that just really have a problem with the town administrator and basically say, no, we're not going to take your pick. We want you to go back and pick somebody else. Chances of that happening may be a little less, but it is still there, so you can't totally take the politics out as much as you try. Thirdly, I know the board has a 15-day, under your plan, a 15-day period where they can go ahead and say, no, find somebody else. My problem with that is, how does the board make that decision? Because they're not involved in the original search, so they haven't seen the resumes of the applicants. Then, more importantly to me, is that you don't have the chance to sit in and ask that person questions. You don't get involved in the interview process. That's done entirely by the town administrator. How can we, as members of the Board of Selectmen, go ahead and either give a thumbs up or thumbs down on his selection or hers, no matter who's sitting in that position, without having sat through that interview process? I don't know about you, but anytime I've been in a position where I was responsible for bringing somebody into a position, basically hiring them, I want to look that person in the eye, face to face, and be able to ask them questions and see how they answer it. Not only the words, but also the body language. See how you can tell a lot by watching body language and hearing how they answer a question, by how much they really want the job, how qualified they are. And we don't get that as a Board of Selectmen if the town administrator is asking all those questions. So like I say, there are several things I have problems with. And again, most of it's philosophical, and I imagine this was probably brought up in discussion during your meetings, but it's something I'm having a very hard time. I'm not going to say now how I'm going to vote next week, because there'll be more open discussion about it, but I have real concerns about that aspect.
All done with the first one?
All done with the first one.
Mr. Carter?
Okay. Actually, I think I saw a couple components in there. One was with regards to the police chief. There will be a yearly review. We talked about that at our meetings. It's not to circumvent a yearly review process. He'd be given basically his objectives. After the first year, he'd get a review. After the second year, he'd get a review.
Mm-hmm.
The trigger point is this 3-year, as you said, this 3-year contract. That town administrator would look at the 2.5-year mark to see if things are going well, results are what the town's expecting, what he's expecting, what the Board of Selectmen is expecting. Should he decide that it's just not working out, he has the opportunity at that particular point to put together a committee. The committee is 5 members. I think one almost semi-retired professional police officer of some type, with residents that will go through the process of coming up with these 3 candidates. We could use the Collins Center, which we did in the past for the town administrator search, so we know that we're looking at nothing but qualified candidates to be a potential police chief. Once that has been weeded down to a select few, the town administrator would review it and come up with his selection. What we also talked about in our meeting was that, let's just say for some reason the Board of Selectmen was happy with the police chief. The existing police chief would also be able to be part of that group trying to reapply for his position again. So basically, the Board of Selectmen is getting a final list, including the prior police chief, for them to decide at that 15-day grace period what they're looking for in the next police chief. So this process kind of covers what you said at your first component, where there isn't just a 2.5-year gap before someone gets reviewed.
Okay.
It actually gets the townspeople involved with regards to issues and concerns that they might have with regards to who they want as a police chief. It brings in professional expertise, goes alongside with the town administrator's guidelines, and the selectmen get the final say. That seemed to be, I understand your concern about being more involved in the process, but the idea was to give the Board of Selectmen a qualified candidate that can get the job started day one. And then they'll interview this person. If they think this person isn't right for the position, they will tell the town administrator that, and then the town administrator bring in the next candidate.
Okay, because there's something, excuse me, Mr. Angley, if I could, there's something that I was not aware of, and I don't believe it's in the proposed document, that the Board of Selectmen will then be able to bring that candidate in as recommended by the town administrator and have a chance to interview that person.
They have to, after the 15-day mark, and correct me if I'm wrong, that they would talk to the final candidate.
Yeah, I just wanted to, on the 15-day piece, this position has to have an affirmative vote, where the other positions have the 15 days. This doesn't have a time limit. This is, the Board of Selectmen must vote positively, where all the other positions, or most of the other positions, do have the 15-day window. This one would not have that.
Right, so that just makes my point even more germane, the fact that we don't have the chance to go back and bring that person in for an interview. We don't have that 15 days. Also, one other, I do need a point of
No, you have-
clarification.
You have 30 days, 60 days.
Okay, so there is a time, okay, I
There is no
misunderstood
time
you.
limit. You can bring the person in, and you would bring the person in.
Would we be able to bring in the other candidates, though? As I said, because, you know, it's one thing to hear from the one person that you've, you know, the administrator selected. It's still, you've got the chance, but, you know, to hear I really think the board should hear from the other two. I do have one point, one other, and then I'll let you go.
Before you go on.
Okay.
Frank.
Just a point, Alan, I think part of our discussion was, we agreed that the relationship between the Board of Selectmen and the town administrator is not in a vacuum. I mean, the day-to-day correspondence, the meetings, there's nothing secret. I think that part of our scenario, if you will, of what would happen 2.5 years out, if you had, I think the term was a real slug sitting over there, not my word, everybody would sort of know it. And the selectmen would be, you know, you maybe had one friend, but I think the relationship between the selectmen and the town administrator is such that there's no vacuum there, you know, where it's all of a sudden a big surprise, 2.5 years, well, where'd this come from? I mean, that's how I took it.
Yeah, and I think that point is well made. These decisions are not gonna be made in a vacuum. You'll get an opportunity to see resumes if you wanna see them. And you're not gonna suddenly be presented with a candidate at the end stage of this selection process and be asked to say, yeah, you know, this is the right guy, without having done your homework. And I know, Mr. Dunham, you will do your homework. Could we move on to the second
I
recommendation?
just had one other quick point on this first item. Now, is it the way your proposal written, is it the town administrator will actually appoint the police chief, or and the board is just approving that? Or is the board actually making the appointment?
The board will be making the
Okay,
appointment.
so we'll be going ahead and we'll be in compliance with Part 1, Title 7, Chapter 41, Section 97A.
Correct.
I do my homework, you're right. All right, I think we're gonna agree to disagree, and like I say, I'm gonna have to give this one a lot of thought before our next selectmen's meeting, but I do thank you for your answers.
And just one last thing,
Yeah.
Mr. Dunham, is that this process takes these prior processes and actually puts a constant in place. I believe 2 police chiefs ago, Chief Parker, I believe they used an outside committee to process the search. Then his successor, I think, was picked because he was his right-hand man and knew the town, Mike Mix, who did a great job. And Mike, as you know, left, and Chief Duvally's doing a great job as well, but there seemed to be just a level playing field with regards to being able to examine a variety of candidates, including the person that's got the job right now, to make sure that.
Yeah, I don't have a problem with the procedure. In fact, I think it's a good idea because it is good to have a policy procedure in place, how to get to the 3 finalists. Is just the difference is after that. But like I said, we'll agree to disagree on that right now, and I have to give it more
I
thought.
will just say to finish this discussion, that we felt as a committee that one of the nice things about this proposal was that it requires buy-in from everybody. It requires buy-in from members of the community who will be sitting on that screening committee. It requires buy-in from the town administrator, who will be selecting amongst the final 3 candidates based on his best professional and managerial judgment, because after all, he's going to be working with the police chief on matters having to do with union contracts and budgets.
Exactly.
And third and last, it requires ultimate buy-in and decision-making authority from the Board of Selectmen. Everybody. Let's move on to the
I
next.
promise the rest of them are a lot shorter. Okay, your second one was treasurer tax collector going from a voted position to appointed position. And that one I had to give some thought to, because I'm kind of loath to take away the public's right to vote a position. However, what swayed me to go along with your recommendation is the importance of that position. It really takes a special skill set to perform the position of treasurer tax collector, because there's so much involved with it. And there is a risk of someone not qualified being elected. And so I think, you know, going for the greater good, which is the smooth operation of the treasurer tax collector office, I think in this case does warrant putting in for a special legislative act to go ahead and change that from a elected position to a appointed position. And I like the way you've got it set up with, you know, the chairman of the finance committee, chairman of capital outlay, and the town administrator. I find this, well thought out, and that I can give it my full support. See?
Thank
I told you. All right, next one. DPW commissioners. This is another, this, again, this is gonna take a special act by the state by the legislature to even get it through. There was an article in the newspaper, and it said in there that I don't know where it came from, but reported that they rarely met, and they also had a problem with getting quorums. Now, how many times they actually met, I don't know. I do know, going back onto the town website, they were scheduled to meet 12 to 13 times a year since 2012. Whether they met that much, I don't know. My question is, did you do research on how many towns still have DPW commissioners? And if so, what was your result?
We didn't have a quantifiable number that we looked at, so I don't have a specific answer for you. I do know that the trend is in many communities to get away with an elected autonomous board of public works directors. But I don't have an exact number for you.
Okay.
Um,
Okay, so that didn't enter into your discussions at all? Because on this one, again, this is one, there are several of these that I still have to put a lot of thought in between now and the time they come before the board, and I'm just being honest with you. Sure.
We were advised when we asked the question how many times they had met in the last year, the estimate came back 5. But other people couldn't remember the last time they actually met as a full board.
Okay. Now, did you meet with any of the commissioners? And I know you met with Mr. Woods, the acting superintendent, DPW superintendent. Did you also meet with the commissioners themselves?
We met with Mr. Kelly,
Okay.
and we also met with Mr. Hallinan.
Okay. Very good. Like I say, I don't really have much to say on that. It's just that to let you know that I need to hear more, I need to think on it more. Board of Health going from elected to appointed. That one, again, I'm not sure of, because again, you're taking away the citizen's right to vote for a position. But I can almost see it a little bit more, because a check showed they only meet on average 3 times a year. Then that's going, based off the town website, and I'm assuming that's a meeting that had an agenda. So they were actually scheduled to meet a lot less even than the DPW commissioners. I know you talked to Mr. Tinkham. Did you also talk to any of the members of the Board of Health and get their feelings on this?
We did not.
Okay, so basically, that one was just a department head and not,
Well, at the point that we were looking at this, we were in the middle of the election season.
that makes it harder.
And we did have one vacancy on the Board of Health. And we did not, we stayed away from quizzing the incumbent Board of Health members in view of the time frame.
I can understand that, but I think
We had
that
a
would
long
be-
conversation. I think Mr. Tinkham was in with us twice, and the question that we asked of him was, did he feel that he needed oversight and supervision by a Board of Health that was elected? And his response was, it really doesn't make a difference to me. It doesn't affect my ability to present what I need to present to the board. And as Mr. Cotter, I'm sure, is about to tell you, our feeling was that by going to an appointed board in this instance, and a board by your own research doesn't meet very often, we're hoping to attract appropriately qualified candidates who might not otherwise want to subject themselves to the rigors of a political campaign.
Okay.
There are a lot of people out there in Carver who are very qualified.
Oh, I have no doubt in that.
But
Probably they're also very reticent, given the past history of the political climate in the town that we're trying to change now.
Precisely.
And just as a follow-up, that when we looked at this particular division, we're looking at operating efficiencies. We're not looking at areas that are failing. And one of the items going forward would be, since this Board of Health is a very important position within the town, that we always have the most qualified candidates in that role. Not to say that we don't now, we do now. The question is, going forward, giving the, changing this from elected to appointed, make sure that people get into that position that have the qualification and skill set.
Okay, thank you. As far as conservation agent going from full-time to part-time, with the line item for a grant writer, you do know the fire department has a grant writer that volunteers her time to help them with, and, you know, the fire department is very successful on getting grants. I think you're all aware. But as far as the position itself, I am totally undecided right now. That's gonna really have to depend on the debate we have with the Board of Selectmen, as to which way I would lean. I'm not leaning one way. I can see both sides, one from an economical standpoint. Did attend one of the meetings where this was discussed quite a bit during one of the meetings I attended. So again, this is where I have a lot to think about. From a strictly monetary point of view, it makes sense. Whether the workload warrants down to 19 hours, that's one of those, you know, I know we have, you know, it was by the previous board that the town administrator was to, you know, either 19 hours or 35 hours. This is one of those gray areas, and I know it was because over 19 hours, they get health benefits, under 19 unless they don't. To me, this is one of those gray areas that may have to be considered for like a 25 or 30, or 25 hours, 26, somewhere in there. Or be prepared to go to that, as you said, if we find out that 19 hours is just totally insufficient. So, like I say, I've got a lot of thinking to do on this one.
And can I just take a
Certainly.
moment to address that?
Yep.
One of the things that and I appreciate the comments from the conservation agent talking about when she first obtained the position, it was 19 hours a week. Taking that into consideration, we have a different model now with this Consolidated Inspectional Services Division, where it's trying to get all hands on deck to make sure that the public is being serviced in the most economical, efficient way possible. By looking at this now as a 19-hour conservation position with a Consolidated Inspectional Services Division, the idea is to provide the same service as we had before. The fact that we're looking at putting an item into the budget as a grant writer position isn't for the smaller grants. It's when you have to go out and get maybe a heavy third party to go in and going after the $500,000, $1 million grants that are right there. So the intent was really not to just, you know, we're gonna cut dollars from the budget and we'll see what happens. It was doing it consciously to keep the service level where it's at. And the town administrator, as well as the Board of Selectmen, will be looking as we go forward to see if that's working. If that is not working, I'm sure we'll be back here again revisiting the position sometime down the road.
Okay, thank you. Let's see, next, building and grounds combining with the DPW. On the town side, have absolutely no problem with that. I think it's smart business. It's already been demonstrated or documented that this will have an immediate impact on saving the town money. And it's being that they're both on the town side, it's a lot simpler thing to get done with. The next phase is going to take a lot of work and negotiation. And so I am coming up with an agenda item. I don't want to go into it too much detail here, that may help us along that road, or at least provide a framework to get into that discussion. But for the first part of the phase, DPW with building and grounds, yeah, I can support that. That's not a problem. Do you want to comment? No.
Sure. Quick second. The Finance Committee for the past 3 or 4 years has looked at ways to reduce costs and keep efficiency in place. And we've made recommendations in the past to look at buildings for both town-owned buildings and school buildings, to say that we have to be able to leverage people and equipment, again, to provide a level of service that the town expects the most economical way possible. I think this marrying of the buildings and grounds and DPW just also seems to make sense, to have this consolidated
I would agree.
entity. I think it will, you're right, you hit it right on the button. There will be challenges, and there will be a lot involved in order to get this process to work. But I think down the road, it's best for the town.
Yeah, I believe it, you know, it's worth, I think the potential savings to the town make it worth, you know, definitely worth investigating. But there are, you know, you're dealing Chapter 70, you're talking union contracts, you're talking MSBA, so there's a lot of negotiating that will need to go on to get that next phase done.
Sure.
And finally, I've got the consolidation of the inspection departments into one big inspection department. I think it's a great idea. Others may disagree with me, but to me, that is one of the best things we can do to increase the services to the town. As a resident, I can't tell you how frustrated it can be to go in and say, well, I want this type of permit, but that window's closed. But you can go over and get this other window and get another kind of permit. To have it consolidated, so one-stop shopping, so our residents can come in and go ahead and get the services they need, I think is a fine idea and does have my full support.
Thank you for
And
coming
on that,
here
I
tonight.
thank you very much for your time. I'm sorry for taking up so much of it, but
I have one remark that I'd like to make.
Certainly.
to you Before you go. It sounds that you are tending to support most of the recommendations
That's
that
affirmative.
have come out of this committee. In conclusion, we hope that during the course of the next week, as you struggle with the pieces and parts of this that you still have not quite gotten your head wrapped around, that you will eventually come around to accepting the positive effects that these recommendations will have for governance going forward in the town of Carver. It has been my singular goal as chair of this committee to work with these folks to get them to unanimity. And it is our fervent hope now as a group that the selectmen come to unanimity as well.
we're gonna try our best. That's all I can promise you.
Mr. Chairman, can I make a comment here? All the things that you went over, Alan, there weren't any nice black and white issues. They were all that gray area. Because like appointment of the police chief by the town administrator versus the selectman. I went through a difficult time last year when the Board of Selectmen were appointing a new police chief. That had a bearing on my feelings towards whether the administrator makes the appointment or the selectman. We, the selectmen, made the appointment, 3 of us, last year. That was a tough time because it was just by the selectmen, and yet I didn't have much say in the process as a selectman. So it was not, none of these were, it was, you go home after our governance meetings, and while I'm working, because we met early in the morning, these guys, we're early morning guys, and it went through my head for a couple hours after the meeting, because like I feel for the conservation agent, the DPW commissioners. I had some strong feelings as an experience as a selectman, going to trying to get them together in some meetings last winter. The whole array of categories that you went through, none of them were easy. They were tough. And as the chair and the vice chair are saying, we had several points of view, one of which was the economics of the whole picture, which we have to be real cautious on. So anyway, just wanted to point out that we worked hard at it.
And that's why I commend the board, the governance committee, for the great work you have done, because I know that it has not been easy, and I do thank you for that.
Thank you.
I observe a third selectman among us tonight. Mr. Clark, would you like to approach?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. As the rest of the speakers have said, I'd like to thank you all for your efforts. I think I said this last week after the presentation, but it is so very clear the type of time and energy and thought that went into this that I'm just extremely impressed with the entire effort. And going through, I have a few questions that are almost technical in nature, because I was just so impressed. You really thought of, in many ways, pretty much everything I think that could be considered. But first, I'd like to say hello to Mr. Grimes. It's been a while since we've thrown furniture at each other.
Yeah,
And
we had fun. I remember that conversation. That was funny.
I
We still talk about that.
hope they're back as feeling better.
Yes, yes, thank you, thank you.
I'll try to not go on too
Notice my
long.
lack of hair, that was another reason, I can explain later.
I thought that was, someone told me you were doing that deliberately to look more distinguished.
Yes, yes, actually,
And it's working.
Board of
I
Health,
did.
Board of Health issue, go ahead.
Yeah. On the police chief contract renewal, if the town administrator comes to the Board of Selectmen and does not recommend the renewal of the contract for the police chief, what happens at that point? Does the board have the right to make the reappointment in spite of the recommendation of the town administrator? Or does the town administrator's recommendation not to reappoint immediately send us out to a search?
Mr. Ward, you're up.
I think it was deemed that we felt that at that point it was the responsibility of the town administrator to go forward and appoint a steering committee or a search committee. So it would go through the process
So we would
at that
begin the
point. Now,
process of a
the
search.
present chief, as I recall, can apply through that process. That was what we talked about. That enabled the town administrator through his evaluations, yearly evaluations, and then an evaluation in the range of 2.5 years to 3 years. That would be his final evaluation, deeming whether he would support the chief, the present chief, for another 3-year contract, or he would turn it back to the process to go through the screening committee. I'm wrong?
No, I was,
Oh,
we're doing sign language over there.
Is it awfully warm in here?
I just discarded my coat. You want me to open a window?
When we were in here a week ago, it was freezing. You remember? I'm sorry, Mr. Ward.
So that was, as I understand it, that's a process we put in place.
All right, so essentially then, if the town administrator determines that he's unhappy with the performance of the police chief as he approaches reappointment, then essentially we would go through the search process again, but the existing chief would be allowed to move forward. Let's say we go through that process, and the town administrator makes a recommendation that is not the incumbent chief. I guess the board at that point would say no, would vote no, and then the town administrator would go back and send someone else forward. And if it's not the incumbent chief that the board wants, if the board's feeling was that to keep the incumbent chief, this process could go on a while possibly, if it got ridiculous, I guess.
Yeah,
But just wanted to understand in theory the way it worked.
In theory, that's correct, and the Board of Selectmen, in the end, is always the backstop. They are after all, the elected representatives for the people of Carver. So we want them to have the last vote and the ultimate decision-making authority here.
I mean, I would think that what I just described would be unlikely, because I would think that there'd be some discussions between the board and the town administrator to try to.
Yeah, like we were saying to Mr. Dunham, these decisions are not going to be made in a vacuum. You folks, as the board, will know what's going on, and the candidates being discussed, you'll have access to information concerning resumes and what the sense of the community members is as the process works through.
On the appointed town treasurer collector, I believe that the appointing committee was to consist of the chair of the finance committee, chair of the capital outlay committee, and the town administrator. I guess my suggestion there is to seek the inclusion of the town accountant, because there's no closer relationship that exists than between the town treasurer and the town accountant working together for reconciliation purposes. Whether this needs to be done formally or simply, by policy, having the town accountant be included in the process, that working relationship, as we have seen over the years, is absolutely crucial. And I would think that a town accountant could bring quite a bit of knowledge and some very intelligent questions to the game that might not be understood otherwise.
Yeah, good idea.
That's why we're here.
And just to be 100% clear, that if we abolished the DPW commissioners and the Board of Health as elected positions, then the town administrator would be the appointing authority for the DPW superintendent and for the health agent.
Subject to the 15-day
That would be the appointing direction. What was the time constraint?
subject to the 15-day veto by the Board of Selectmen.
Right.
Right, the Board of Selectmen always, I think the way the town administrator job description reads is the Board of Selectmen can always overturn pretty much any decision of the town administrator within that 15-day period. Let's see. The organization charts that the town administrator has put forward for the inspectional departments and whatnot, have those been reviewed by your committee?
They have.
And they are included in your recommendation?
Not the personnel recommendations.
No, not the personnel recommendations,
just
but the actual
chart.
reorganization of the departments themselves.
The squares and the lines.
That's clear, so that even I understand that, thank you. I also, like Mr. Dunham, support the idea of bringing the insurance and buildings and grounds of the schools over to the town side. As there's been a lot of discussion, obviously, we need the school committee to be completely on board with that. We don't want to, be starting any sort of a war. And as it worked out this year, time frame wise, it looks like it's probably going to be next year rather than this year that we're able to do that. And I think we're talking about, Michael, correct me if I'm wrong, we're talking about maybe trying to put a committee together that will actively study both of those and then bring recommendations back to the school committee and to the Board of Selectmen. And again, we just want to make sure that we're not sacrificing Chapter 70 money by moving monies over to various sides. And then we want to make sure that the schools are comfortable that there's not going to be any diminishment to service simply because we consolidate departments.
May I address that, Mr. Clark? We will be acting, I think, on an item that Mr. Dunham and Ms. Kavicki from the school committee both felt on that issue. So I think that's going to end up being an agenda item next Tuesday night for the selectmen to discuss.
Okay? And that's all I had. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Clark.
And just my compliments again on doing a great job.
Thank you. Now, I think we've heard from all the selectmen who are present and among us tonight, including Mr. Ward. But for one, right? Who are we missing from the board?
Ms. Maroney.
Ms. Maroney is not here tonight. So as we have gone through the questions and comments from the current members of the board, I observe the town clerk present tonight. Do you have anything you'd like to say? Okay. I don't think I see any other board chairs or, do you have something you'd like to tell us? You're hiding back there in the corner, I could hardly see you. Give us your name and address.
Arthur Borden, Chairman of the Board of Health. I'm a little disappointed that you didn't come and reach out to us to find out why we don't meet on a fairly regular basis, and I can tell you, prior to my coming on the board had a policy of any septic permit plan that came through the Board of Health office had to be reviewed by the three-member board, which caused the board to meet twice a month. Mr. Tinkham has been there plenty long enough, can review plans and permits. We made a change to our policy back then that if a plan for new construction came in that met the requirements 100%, there was no reason for it to wait 2 weeks for the board to meet to act on it. There's enough delay in the building construction process. It didn't need to come from our office. So if a plan comes in, conforms to 100%, he's authorized to review the plan, sign the permit, and out the door it goes. So it's basically, we meet for repairs and upgrades to systems, which under Title V, there's a mechanism called maximum feasible compliance that allows for various bending of the rules, so to speak, to keep from condemning houses. We work very hard, especially in Crystal Lake, where a lot of houses are being refinanced. They've got old systems that have failed. We work within the boundaries of Title V and as close to our regulations as possible to get systems on those lots that are, much more in compliance than what they have on the ground now. It really depends on the activity of those. If there's repairs that come in that don't need maximum feasible compliance, that comply, Robert's also authorized to issue the permit. So we don't meet for the sake of meeting, but it's not a case that we don't know what's going on either. I mean, Robert's in constant communication with us. I feel as far as the expertise on the board, you have I don't think you can get much more qualified people than what we have across the whole spectrum of what the Board of Health has in its purview. As far as cost savings on the stipend, our board makes money for the town. With the fees that we bring in as opposed to what our budget is, we make money for the town. We're meeting in 2 weeks to update our fee schedule. If the permits stayed level across the board from this year to next year, we'll add another $10,000 to the coffers. And on the other hand, we've saved the town taxpayers money with the preferred hauler for the curbside rubbish and recycle. By going to that preferred hauler, we cut the rates people were paying in half. The hauler provides the bins. There's no expense to the taxpayer other than the half of what they were paying. A couple of years ago, when the school had to upgrade the septic system at the John Carver School, we suggested, through the expertise that we had, an innovative alternative system that saved the school and the town $200,000 from what was projected for what they were going to have to put in, because they were looking at a conventional system that required 2 very expensive pumps. This system is 100% gravity, so it saved $200,000 being installed, plus it's saving year after year because now there's no maintenance for the pumps.
If I could just interrupt for a minute, I
Yep.
want
Yep.
you to be clear, Mr. Borden, and also everyone out there and people who might be watching at home. It's not the recommendation of this committee that the Board of Health be disbanded, dissolved, or abolished.
I understand that.
Nor is it the feeling of this committee that the Board of Health has not been discharging its duties properly. We recognize your contributions. Our initiative speaks more to the fact that we want to take this position out of politics, have it appointed by the town administrator, who will then be able to choose amongst what we feel is likely to be a larger pool of qualified candidates. Now, that's not to say or mean or infer anything disrespectful about the current board members. We recognize that these folks have been, in some cases, including your own, have been sitting as board members for some time and have been contributing appropriately and professionally. We're looking down the road. We're looking going forward. Who is it that we're going to be able to replace you with when the time comes? Are we going to be able to get somebody as qualified as you? I mean, let's face it, we all have a shelf life,
I
right?
understand. Yeah.
So that's the nature of the recommendation here. We recognize the contributions, but we're thinking about the future and attracting the best, most qualified, and most professional people going forward.
I can tell you, the few vacancies that we've had, the board at the time has been able to reach out to the people with the expertise that we need on that board. That's how I got there, was, previously there was a registered engineer on the board, Al Deloyd, that passed away. The 2 members that were left, and Mr. Tinkham reached out to me to see if I was interested, knowing that I worked in town. I had extensive experience with DEP, Title V systems, public water supplies. And I said, yes, I'd be interested. I got appointed to fill the vacancy, and then I ran for the election. When Ed Lawrence passed away, again, we reached out to find someone with a little bit different experience, and we came up with his son David, who has extensive experience in food service and inspections. We've not had a problem finding people to replace, to keep the expertise that we need on there. This past year, Steve Crawford decided he'd been there long enough, didn't want to run for re-election. We had one person that was very interested, Eric Mueller, who, again, fits in perfectly with what we need for our expertise. He didn't have a problem running for election. There's no politics with our board. We are 100% in agreement. There's no agendas. Everything is left at home. It doesn't even come to the door at town hall.
And again, I don't mean to suggest or imply that there's politics amongst the members of the board.
Yep.
What we're trying to do is attract the most qualified people that we can, and we feel that a greater pool of qualified candidates will be available from which to choose if we take this out of the political arena and make it an appointed process. I've been speaking a lot about this and also a bit out of turn. Mr. Grimes, would you like to address this?
Yeah, I think you always come with the adage of if it's not broken, you don't fix it, obviously. And even when Mr. Tinkham was before us, everybody raves about the Board of Health and professionalism and what you do. I think the biggest concern is the political aspect. How do we ensure we can still keep the quality and skills and professionalism we have in the board now if we don't change it from the political? Because I think the biggest discussion was that when, like the chairman said, the shelf life moves on and people move on, especially within your own board that has that ability to appoint or pick out or out of the public. We're more worried about the political process bringing in someone that totally has just political reasons, has no expertise, or is not going to show up for meetings, or is not going to contribute. That's the biggest, I think, the biggest controversy we had as we go through this, especially with the Board of Health. We recognize just how good you people are, and we appreciate it, but we want to ensure we keep it that way. And and our concern is to take the political part, only the elective part, and the fact that you could be subject to someone running that, you know, has no qualifications, which I mean the political process is. I mean, let's face it, when I ran for selectman, I think I flunked civics in high school. I'm not too sure how I got elected. But I'm not too sure. I might have run on a truck driver candidate now that I think about it. But really, we appreciate the Board of Health and what you do, and we hope, if this goes forward, that you're going to continue. But we're worried when we don't have you, and we're worried about the political part of that. That's, we praise what you guys do.
Mr. Boyden, do you have anything else?
Just a question. If you go to the appointed process, are you going to appoint for terms? Or, we have some boards in town, personally, I've seen that appear almost like they're lifetime appointments because there's no, you know, every 3 years or whatever, there's no, let's review what's going on with a particular group. It just, as long as the bodies are there, they seem to stay there. That's a concern of mine.
Yeah, I think Mr. Malinowski just put up 3 fingers, right? Fortunately, it wasn't just one and in the middle. And again, if he's discharging his duties properly as a town administrator, he's going to know who's working and who isn't,
Yep.
right? And he's going to get feedback from you folks who are working. So these decisions about who to appoint and when to appoint them are never made in a vacuum. There's always oversight, and of course, his oversight is the Board of Selectmen.
Right.
So I understand the concern that you have that sometimes the same faces keep showing up. Part of the reason for that might be because people don't want to run for these jobs that are elected jobs. So we're trying to open this up a little bit more, and in the process, have Mr. Malinowski and the Board of Selectmen and you folks sort of police the process yourself.
Okay.
Thank you, Mr. Boyd.
Can I say one thing, Arthur? I look around the different towns and boards of health, and they don't have the qualified people we have. But in the election process, we are not guaranteed to have a person who's a surveyor and a person who has expertise in the food industries, and there's no guarantee that. And I remember I've been hanging around town for a long time. And when we first established, because when I was first a selectman, the Board of Health were the selectmen. And I remember some people being on there that were not qualified to be on the Board of Health. So you know, I'm saying, okay, appointment versus election. Appointment, we'd have probably a better shot at getting the qualified people that we need on the Board of Health. That was it in a nutshell, Arthur.
And it is actually the same analysis that applies to our decision to recommend that the treasurer tax collector's job go from elected to appointed.
Mr. Chair, just
Yes, Mr. Angle.
Just a quick comment, Arthur, and to anyone here who's been thinking, probably going through your minds the same thing that went through ours as we began this process. The first thing we really didn't want to do was to, one, diminish the role of the selectmen. They're the elected people, that's where the buck stops. Or to deny the citizens the right to vote. But that's where we had to weigh and I think you've heard the rationale that we embraced as we went through this, but it was a thorny, long process where we were totally torn. I've been through the whole thing as to, gee, I don't want to deny anybody the right, but sometimes it just works better that way in terms of getting the best people. Because as beautiful as the public election is, anybody can run for office. And if they've got a great following, you could get a real donkey in there who's, hail fellow well, or lady well met, doesn't know squat about them. So anyway, I think we all were challenged with these thoughts as we began this process. Believe me, we anguished over it. So.
We did, and I'll say it again for what it's worth. These decisions weighed heavily on us and continue to do so.
Exactly.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, Eric.
Who would like to come up next? Mr. Kelly. And now that we've moved into comments and questions from members of the public, I would ask that these comments be succinct. It's already 10 minutes after 8. We've been going now almost 2 hours. So,
You weren't planning on leaving early, were you, Mr. Chairman?
no, I'm going to be here. You got that Schwarzenegger look going there, so I don't want to cross you, Mr. Grimes. Mr. Kelly.
Yes, a couple of things I'd like to explain to you. As far as the school department coming in with the DPW, it cannot happen. That's one that cannot happen. The ones like the ones that are in the building and grounds, that's the best idea I ever heard. But on the school department, you cannot bring in the DPW. Because I know a place down the Cape that brought in the DPW and did the same thing. The federal government said, stop the money. They're the ones that control the schools a lot of times because of federal money going into the schools. They won't allow it. So I just want to bring that to your attention.
Well, the chairman, when he saw you coming, he said, Jack, you've got this one. And I thank you very much, because I don't know a damn thing of what you're talking about, John. The federal government may play a role in terms of funding.
Sure does.
But that's not where we were going. And by the way, we're not there yet.
No.
The process is still in flux a little bit in terms of the DPW and the technical side of the building and grounds side of the school.
That's different.
Yeah, and that's where we're sort of coming from right now, but we have not finalized that. I think that's going to come up after the town meeting, is that it? Yeah, so there's a lot of time, John, to discuss this, and I'm sure if there's an area of funding that we've overlooked that would put a stop to this whole thing, then, we're going to have to deal with it. But it's, at this point, it was the first time I had heard of it, at least, what you just mentioned, so.
Yes, it did come out, and it did come down. There was a place in the Cape that they stopped the funding on the federal aid to the schools. The schools come under the federal aid too.
But when you met with us, you didn't bring that up, so that's why I'm really, the first time I've heard it, so.
Yeah. And as far as bringing the DPW and the maintenance department for the school, for the town, I think that's a great idea, because that would put them all in one unit. They can be controlled. But I think we're going to have a problem when it comes to the DPW commissioners. at this town meeting. I think there's gonna be a big problem there. You're gonna be surprised.
We, we dealt with that, I think, to a point where they,
But you can't deal with the town meeting when it says no, when it says yes.
well, I think to that end, we'll have to see what town meeting comes up with in terms of the members of the DPW commissioners. We have been, I think, to put it kindly, there's been an attendance problem and participatory problem in terms of the commissioners, and to this point, we're looking at perhaps a change would be the right way to go. And according to the acting, he's the acting right now, right? Acting super, who's doing a great job, by the way.
Yes, he is. I correct.
Yeah, no, everybody is. All the guys that are working there understand. They've all pitched in, taken over the duties to make sure this works with Billy gone. And you knew there was going to be, we knew there'd be big holes. Billy been around for 40 years, 7-6. But anyway, I think to that end, we've been looking at the membership of the commission and whether it should be appointed or done away with.
Well, I agree with you there too, because I know that I've been head of the department for quite a while, and then the other guys quit, and they didn't come back, they didn't get sworn in and stuff. It just left me hanging.
Well, that's our point.
What am I supposed to do?
That's
Stay there until I finish my term out, right?
well, that's our point. That
Right.
We realized there was a problem.
But it is a great problem, and I agree with you. Because if they're not gonna do their job, no sense of having them.
Thank you, John.
Thank you.
Thanks, John.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Gregg.
And I do want to say, as John moves away from the table, that he has been a long-serving commissioner of the DPW in the town of Carver, and continues to be a serving commissioner, and we all owe him our thanks. Thank you, John.
Thank you.
We do, John. Thank you.
Thank you.
Who else would like to be heard from? Mr. Now and
Nope.
Mr. Now and member, actually chairman of the Conservation Commission and member of the Zoning Board of Appeals.
And the Earth Removal Commission.
Yes. And
All of
wears
whom I've
many
s-
hats.
Well, I filled in a number of empty chairs, of which we still have more. Anyway, I'm appearing before you as the present chair of the Conservation Commission, and I am not delighted with the idea of reducing the agent's position to part-time. However, I realize that we have to deal with the realities, and we'll have to see if it can work. When I came onto the commission, was in 1997, we had no agent. We had a individual in the DPW who acted as the conservation sort of factotum. And a lot of the things that we were doing were really not very well thought out, and it was a challenge. At that point, this town was considering appointing a part-time agent, and they did appoint one. And he worked, I think, for about 5 years or so before he left to follow some other opportunities. And at that point, Sarah, I think, applied for the agent's position. Now, the conservation agent has grown in importance in the town, partly due to her activities sort of expanding the job and taking over things that nobody else bothered to do. For instance, the grant writing. But one of the biggest things that we found was that she spent probably 25% of her time in the first 6 years resurrecting and cleaning up the work of the part-time agent who preceded her, because there were a number of things we found, applications which had never been properly filled out, things that had never been filed with the Registry of Deeds, just a terrific backlog of stuff. And we also proceeded to get the members of the commission better educated. There's a group called the Mass Association Conservation Commissions, which puts out a 3-inch binder of information for conservation agents and commissions to follow. And Sarah made sure that we all had them. So this present commission, many of whom the members have been on for quite a while, has a great deal of expertise, but we're suffering from a shortage of members. We have 2 empty slots at the present, and we'd appointed people earlier to do them, but they couldn't pick it up. They had other responsibilities apparently that demanded their time. So that's one thing, but I have to point out that we can't just appoint anybody to be a commissioner. It's got to be a person who has social attitudes that are acceptable. We can't have somebody who's confrontational constantly, who is not understanding about the role of wetlands in the community. And so it's been a real challenge. The fact that Carver is over 51% wetlands, and how so many of the questions that come up to us. Today we had a walk where we looked at a property down on Wareham Street. Individuals have a well which is actually built right into the foundation of the house, and a septic system which is about 15 feet from the house. And it was mandated that they had to get this overhauled. So we had to double check on the mapping, which was done by GAF, and very well done, with a new location for a new well, and then the appropriate distance for the settling basin, and then for the leaching field from that. And we had to do all this within the parameter of the fact that they were within 100 feet of Sampson Brook, so which is a active river is considered. So these are some of the things that the commission has to deal with, and that the agent has led us to being aware of and taken us out and worked with it. She's also, I don't know who's going to fill the shoes of the person who heads the Plymouth Carver Aquifer Committee, because that's another job which she took on, and which is quite important to Carver. Now, as the economy improves, I'm sure, that is the building economy, you're going to see another push for housing starts in Carver. This due to the fact that the cranberry industry is in one of its periodic slumps, and growers will attempt to gain some income by selling house lots. And each one of these has to be supervised to make sure that it's not going to be a problem with wetlands. And that's a thing that the agent has always taken on and done very well in the past. So I think that the person you select as the agent is going to have to either be very experienced in this or become very experienced in this fairly quickly. You may have to spend some time, just as we did with the chief of police, sending him off to the FBI Academy. We may have to see if there's some training in a wetlands program that we might have to spend your new putative part-time agent in training. So that's just something I want to consider. The grant writing was something that she had moved into due to the fact that it was an unfilled slot in town government. Nobody was really available or interested in writing grants. We had a person who was supposed to be a grant writer for 2 years, but she allowed herself to be used by other departments as a sort of an assistant clerk, and didn't get much grant writing done. So I see that we have some challenging years ahead, and I don't know whether a part-time agent will be able to fill the slot, but if we have to try it, let's try it. Let's just be aware of the dangers as far as possible failures and problems. Now, when I look back on some of the things she's done, who here realized that we had to have this drainage calculation program for stormwater put in? She picked that up, and the town would have ended up, I think, with something $50,000 in the neighborhood of federal fines if it hadn't been done by a certain time. Nobody else in town seemed to be interested in doing anything about it. I was pretty amazed when I found that out. So this is the type of thing that your agent to be is going to have to be aware of.
I think all of us have responded individually at this point, and it's now back to me. Back to the point of beginning. And if you recall, the issue with which I was dealing when we started tonight was this very issue that you're speaking to us about. I commend you for keeping an open mind on this and simply not saying to us, I oppose this. It's important, I think, that we all keep an open mind at this point. I think it's also important to keep in mind that we are paying Mr. Malinowski good money to make appropriate hiring decisions in his role as town administrator. So the pressure clearly will be on him to choose from candidates, once this goes out to bid, who hopefully will bring qualifications and experience to bear on this job. Whoever that will be, I agree, will have big shoes to fill. But I think now is the time, and so do the rest of the committee members, now is the time to explore a new approach to that role. Now, if it doesn't work, if it is, as Ms. Hewen suggests, going to be too much for one person to do, even though we're splitting off the grant writing piece, which is a substantial piece, and involves, if it's going to be done right, a lot of hours of hard work. But if this doesn't pan out the way that we would like to see, then we can always revisit this, right? These decisions that we make, these recommendations are being made for now,
Yes,
not forever.
I understand that, and we're under duress. We're under the pressure of the big gray cloud of economics sitting over our heads. So I say let's.
May it not rain on your head.
It has many days.
So now, anything else?
No, that's it. I just, I'm concerned because, well, another thing we became aware of over the last 3 years, the federal government is cutting back on its support for agricultural preparation. They used to produce farm plans and so on, which would tell bog builders, for instance, what they could do, what they couldn't do, so on and so forth. All of that's really being trimmed away from them. They're cutting their costs, throwing it onto us. And this was something that, again, that an agent may be expected to work with. And so her mapping ability is going to be very important. The ability to use computerized mapping is one of the maybe bigger criterions that a person's going to have to be able to do, because so much of this is now done. When a plan comes in, it's got to have endangered species areas delineated and so on and so forth.
Mr. Malinowski, could you speak tonight about your experience filling agents' roles and whether there are a good qualified pool of candidates for this particular position, generally speaking?
Let me first begin by stating that we will never replace the skill set that the retired conservation agent had. She possessed a unique set of skills that would be very difficult to duplicate. By splitting the position and having the conservation component and the grant writing component, our pool of applicants blossoms exponentially in the process of finding a wetland scientist to come in and do what Carver needs. And what we're going to be focusing on is someone geographically located in this area that understands the complexities that the agricultural community has to go through. We're not looking for someone that can just process paper. We're going to be looking for someone that, again, understands and is familiar with the idiosyncrasies of cranberry growing and other type of agricultural components. In addition to that, I think what we're going to see too is a pool of applicants that will have a second nature. Some of the map making skills that as were said, is becoming part of the job, and that those again are going to be, I think, second nature. So I do believe, and we have already received several people that have been interested in pursuing some work, and we just worked on hiring someone on a temporary basis to focus on a active project that Jack Hunter and the chairman of the Conservation Commission were working on to select. So we have a short-term solution, and we're going to be working on our long-term solution.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Nowak. Who would like to speak next? Yes, sir. Your name and address, please, and also kindly keep it as brief as possible.
I will do the best I can.
Thank you, sir.
Rich Kaiser, Meadowbrook Way. First, my compliments to you, sir. As of last Tuesday, when I heard you give your report, you did a good job. It was a good report, and I agree with a lot of it, if not most of it. I'm a firm believer in choosing the right person for the right job. As a builder, I sure wouldn't hire a baker to do finish work. And unfortunately, when you open up the door to public elections, you may not always get what you're looking for. And I know how hard a decision this is with this board. I know Dick and I know Jim. By the way, Jim, you look pretty damn good sitting over there. Okay, cool. Two gentlemen on this board know exactly why I'm here. We have some problems behind us, and I spoke to you last week about it briefly. But I think one thing that you have left out is infrastructure. And I think subsidized low-income housing comes under the heading of infrastructure. And I'd like to see this town look into this, because I think it's about time we acted before the state does on a 40B, which is hanging over this town's head. We do not want the state to come in and tell us what to do, or we'll end up with another group of buildings like that behind Town Hall. I think we should come up with plans to soon, and I mean soon, at least start getting something going, at least by the fall, for a 60-unit apartment complex. Because there are serious problems behind us. And as a builder, I recognize them instantly. But when you consolidate, I think you can consolidate your housing into what your program. I think you can call it, you put everything under one head. You get your grant writer, you get your leader, you get your housing head or czar, however you want to call it. And it would be practical, cost efficient. We could have a side of the DPW that could do the grounds work on these low-income housing that the town would own. The revenue would come to the town from both the feds and the state. We could keep our fingers on the funds, not lose control of it. And at the same time, protect those elderly people, the children, that can't protect themselves.
Let me interrupt and ask Mr. Cotter to comment from a governance committee standpoint on the issues that you're raising.
I welcome it because I used to sit on the FinCom, and I can see you.
Well, I know we looked at low-income housing for seniors and, as you said, the buildings that we have in the back with regards to water problems, the wells, and how can we go about...
May I interrupt you, sir?
Sure.
The problems over the Carver Housing Authority is one thing. Over here in Meadowbrook, which is federal, is another thing. These buildings are not being serviced. I took a gentleman out today who's sitting on your board right now and showed him just 2 buildings. He was not impressed.
Mr. Kaiser, before you go on, and I am not cutting you off.
No,
I just kind of want to get us back on track here.
Okay, go ahead. Go ahead.
We have opened this meeting tonight for public comment, most especially on the 7 proposals that will be addressed next week by the Board of Selectmen. I want you to know, and everybody present with us tonight and those watching at home, that our work is not yet done.
Okay?
We have only been meeting for a couple of months,
Mm-hmm.
and we have already bitten off a lot.
More than you could chew?
Well, I don't think more than we can chew, but I don't think we want to be chewing on anything else before town meeting. So your points are well taken. We have received and will incorporate your documents into the committee records and have an opportunity to look at these
Okay.
when we meet in the future.
Dick and Jim both have my phone number.
But for now, this issue about 40Bs and affordable housing and the conditions over there, all appropriate, but probably a little bit premature for now, because
Okay.
we want to focus instead on these other 7 proposals.
Okay? I
You
spoke.
have anything to say by way of wrap-up?
Yes, I want to congratulate you gentlemen on the job that you did do. I'm a firm believer in, like I said, in picking the right person for the right job. And I sometimes you have to make a real tough decision, and I could see in your voice last week, you people have arrived at some very tough and difficult decisions, and I compliment you on your job.
Thank you. Mr. Grimes?
Yes, just briefly, I think that what I would like to say to Richard is that in the future, obviously, it's paramount, the issues we're working on right now. But in the future, one of the discussion points was reviewing the housing situation in Carver, and we have every belief that will come up. If you can be patient.
And I will say this before you close.
Mm-hmm.
We have already had preliminary discussions about the quality of the water over there.
I
And-
think some of it goes to the boilers not being blown out and cleaned.
So we're beginning to get into that area, but again, it's a lot, and there are other issues that are pressing for our attention as well. So
I understand that.
I ask that you just be patient with us.
I am a patient man,
Thank you.
but these people have been putting up with this for 12 to 15, 20 years.
And we've been a committee for 2 months.
I know. I know. But I wanted to present this to you so that it's in your mind that it can come under infrastructure. I mean, Eisenhower did it with housing and the roads. Look what he did after the war.
We won't forget.
Thank you for your time.
Thank you.
Thank you.
You gentlemen have a great night.
You too.
Thank you, Rich.
Who else would like to speak? No one else?
Steve, can you pass those down?
Yes.
Just so that everybody has one.
So I thank everybody for their attention this evening. We've gone on for about 2 hours, almost exactly. I think it's been a productive session, and I hope those watching at home have been helped listening to this discussion as well. We certainly don't have any corner on wisdom, but what we can say, the 5 of us, is that we have had substantial experience in the operation of town government through the years, and we've seen good and we've seen bad. Unfortunately, most recently, it's been more bad than good. Hopefully now a new day is dawning, and we can begin to have a civil discussion about these recommendations and others going forward, not only next week at the BOS, but in a month at town meeting. So I ask now for any further comments, questions, or concerns by committee members. Anything that anybody would like to say?
Through you, Mr. Chair, we were handed a item today regarding some opinions from general counsel. Is that something we'll be tackling at our next meeting?
Yes. Yeah.
Thank you.
Mr. Cotter is referring to the fact that some of what we're talking about in terms of our recommendations are going to require special acts of the legislature. So we have enlisted town council, Lauren Goldberg, to assist us with the proper wording. This is her specialty. And she's answered back, I think, to the town administrator just today on some of this stuff. Again, no policy decisions have been made. They will not be made by this committee. They will be made by the Board of Selectmen and also at town meeting. We're just kind of kicking the ball off here.
Mr. Chairman, may I ask the town administrator, who will present our topics on next Tuesday night at the selectmen's meeting? You or Mr. Gray?
Oh, don't make me go through that again.
It would be Mr. Gray.
All right,
Do I
I'm,
get a stipend?
I'm asking,
I'm writing an electronic newsletter.
I'm asking as many of the governance committee as can come to the selectmen's meeting next Tuesday in support of Steve and our work.
Yeah, and I hope next week, because we've vetted this thoroughly tonight and also talked considerably about it last week, Mr. Carter and I, when we appeared before the BOS, that we will not have a prolonged, extensive discussion. I think we're all, at this point, pretty well advised, most especially the Board of Selectmen, who have to be. And at that juncture, I think the discussion, if I may be so bold, needs to be more amongst them than it needs to be directed to us at this point. I think that we've basically said what we have to say. And if any questions do arise in the interim, by all means, contact the town administrator or your selectman, and I'm sure those questions can get back to us for clarification in time. But next week, I will do my best to be here. I'm trying to remember if I have anything Tuesday night. But if I don't, I will be here, and I hope the rest of the committee members will be as well. Anything else from any board members?
Do you need to schedule the next meeting?
We did.
We did.
It's June 3rd?
Well, actually, we talked about it being 2 weeks from
Today,
today,
it's
but in the
7:30.
morning.
In the morning, 7:30 in the
At
morning.
Which would
7:30.
be June 3rd.
correct.
Okay.
Okay? So we have a motion to adjourn from Mr. Angley.
Second.
All in favor?